The jungle of Varnic 3 was not silent. It breathed. It growled. It watched. Thick green vines hung from trees that scraped the red sky. Strange creatures chirped and hissed in the underbrush.
Nice.
Soldiers from the Alliance avoided the place unless absolutely necessary. They whispered one name whenever someone went missing: the beast. Some said it was a wild animal, half snake, half wolf. Others claimed it was a female warrior from an alien tribe, one who had turned savage after her clan was wiped out. No one really knew, but today, Corporal Jake Maddox knew one thing for sure. He was lost. His team had been ambushed. Retreat. He'd slipped down a slope and rolled into the thickest part of the jungle. His cums were dead. Weapon was half working, and something was watching him. He moved slowly, carefully stepping over roots and ducking beneath glowing mushrooms. His heart raced. He could feel that something was nearby. Not a sound, not a shadow, just a presence. And then he saw it. A flash of movement, fast, low to the ground, a blur between the trees. Jake froze, raising his plasma pistol. His fingers trembled slightly. His eyes scanned the dark. Then he saw her. She didn't look like a beast. Not exactly. She looked like a girl, but not human. Her skin was a smooth obsidian blue, her hair wild like vines, and her eyes, those golden, slitted eyes, burned with warning. Her body was lean, strong, wrapped in tribal cloth and armor made from bones. But her left side was soaked. With blood, she had a wound. A deep one. She growled low, crouched, ready to attack. Claws extended from her hands, her sharp teeth bared. Jake didn't move. "I'm not here to fight," he said calmly, gently lowering his pistol. "You're hurt," she snarled, her muscles tensed. But then she staggered. Her foot slipped. Her claws scratched a nearby tree. She tried to steady herself, but she collapsed to one knee, panting hard. Jake took a small step forward. "Easy, I've med supplies," she hissed, struggling to stand. Her pride wouldn't let her fall, but her body gave up before her spirit. She fainted. Jake rushed to her side. He was sweating now, not from fear, but from urgency. If she bled out, she'd die here alone. And despite everything, her wild look, the rumors, the growls, he saw pain, not evil. He opened his medkit. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The wound was ugly, sliced from shoulder to hip, maybe from a predator or a blade. She must have been running on pure instinct for days. Jake cleaned the area as gently as he could. Her breathing was shallow but steady as he worked. He noticed the tattoos across her ribs, tribal markings, glowing faintly like soft bioluminescence. One mark looked like a moon with claws, another like a jagged sun. "She's not a monster," he muttered. "She's a soldier. Or was one." Suddenly her hand grabbed his wrist. Jake flinched. Her eyes opened barely. She looked at him, confused, breathing hard. "I'm helping you," he whispered. "I could have left. I didn't." She stared, as if trying to understand why a human would touch her without fear. Then her grip loosened. She passed out again. Jake stitched her up, used the gel patch to seal the wound, and wrapped her in a thermal cloak. It was getting dark, and the jungle was turning colder. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, animal cries, rustling branches. He pulled her against a tree and sat beside her, pistol in hand. "I don't know who you are," he said softly, "but you're not dying tonight." He didn't sleep much. Every few minutes he checked on her. Her breathing slowly grew stronger. The fire he built was small, just enough to keep predators away by morning. She stirred again. This time, when she opened her eyes, she didn't growl. She just looked. Jake smiled tiredly. "Morning, beast." She blinked. Then she whispered something in her language. He didn't understand the words, but her tone was different. Not angry, just confused. He pointed to her side. "That wound should heal in a few days. Stay off your feet." She looked at the bandage, then at him. Her eyes narrowed, as if searching for a trick, but there was none. He had saved her. She didn't thank him, but she didn't run either. And for now that was enough, in the heart of the deadly jungle. The feared beast was resting beside a human, and the war between them had paused for one strange silent night. The next morning, mist curled through the trees, and tiny creatures clicked their claws as they scurried past the campfire. Jake sat with his back to the tree, pistol resting on his lap. He hadn't slept much, not with a living legend past. Out, just 2 feet away, she was still breathing. That was a good sign. Jake leaned forward quietly and checked her bandages. No bleeding. The gel had sealed the wound well. But when he touched her skin, something unexpected happened. She grabbed his wrist dash again, fast. But this time there was no anger. Her grip was weak. She was awake, barely. Her golden eyes stared into his, sharp but confused. "I didn't take anything," Jake said calmly. "I just patched you up." Her lips moved, slow and dry. She said something in her alien language. Jake couldn't understand, but he recognized the tone. It wasn't a threat. It sounded like a question. "You're wondering why I helped you," Jake said with a tired smile. "Honestly, I don't know." She blinked, her expression unreadable. Her grip loosened. Her hand slipped down his wrist and rested gently on his knuckles. Jake froze. It wasn't just touch. It was intentional. He watched her eyes close again. This time there was no growl, no threat, no claws. Just trust. Or the beginning of it. By midday, she sat up for the first time. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just watched him like a hawk tracking prey. Or maybe a child watching something for the first time. Jake offered her a protein bar. She sniffed it and made a disgusted face. He laughed. "Yeah, human rations aren't exactly 5-star. Still," she took a bite. Jake pointed to himself. "Jake." She narrowed her eyes. "Yuck," he repeated, slower. She tilted her head and whispered something. It sounded close. Maybe Zek. Good enough. Then she touched her own chest. "Tiara." Jake nodded. "Tiara." He tried it again. Her lips twitched, slightly almost a smile. Later that evening, Jake pulled out his small repair kit and laid her broken blade across his lap. It was more than just a weapon. It had engravings, beads, even dried flower petals wrapped around the hilt. Tribal, sacred. She noticed her posture changed. Tense, she leaned forward and grabbed the blade, hugging it close. Jake raised his hands. "Easy. I wasn't going to take it." Tiara's gaze softened after a second. She glanced at his tools, then at the blade, and slowly held it out to him as if trusting him to fix what no one else could. Jake exhaled, surprised. "You sure?" She nodded once. He got to work. She watched every move. Every twist of the metal, every wire he melted into the cracked hilt. He added a stabilizer, core knot, standard tech, but enough to help balance the blade again. When he handed it back, her fingers brushed his hand for a second. She didn't pull away. She held the touch. Just a moment. But in that moment, she was no longer the beast of Varnock jungle. She was Tiara. A girl from a broken tribe, holding on to the first kind hand she'd felt in a very long time. That night, Tiara didn't sleep far from him. She curled near the fire, her eyes watching the trees, but also him. Jake noticed something while he refilled his canteen. Her body still flinched when distant howls echoed in the dark. She's scared, he realized, but too proud to show it. He didn't say anything, just sat closer. She didn't move away. Then, slowly, without a word, she leaned her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. Jake stared down at her, the beast who once roamed. These jungles, feared by all, had just fallen asleep beside a human, and her breathing matched his, to strangers, to enemies, now sitting under the stars, in silence, connected by a wound and a single honest touch. The sun had barely risen over the treetops when Jake woke to a strange sound. Clink. Drag. Clink. He opened his eyes quickly, hand on his pistol, but it was just Tiara, slowly crawling toward the other side of the camp, dragging something. Behind her, her movements were slow and painful, her injured leg trembling with each push. But her golden eyes burned with focus. Jake rushed to her side. "Whoa, whoa, what are you doing?" She didn't answer. Instead, she yanked a half-buried weapon from under a pile of leaves and moss. The blade shimmered faintly and the light cracked down the center, covered in dirt and dried blood. It wasn't just any blade. It was hers, Yara hugged the weapon to her chest like a mother clinging to a child. Sharp exterior cracked for just a second. Her shoulders trembled. Jake knelt beside her, voice soft. "You shouldn't be moving yet." Still no reply. Instead, she turned the broken blade in her hands and stared at it, her expression unreadable. Was it sadness? Shame? Grief? Jake had seen that look before. It wasn't about the weapon. It was about what the weapon represented. Is. Why? Or why were what I will wide with why we would that why get we I why we that when we have with He guessed Yara looked at him, surprised. Then she nodded just once. Jake gently reached for the blade. She tensed, but didn't stop him this time. He studied the weapon. The handle was carved with alien symbols, some faded, some glowing faintly. There were tiny etchings of moons, claws, and stars. Each marking told a story, a history. She was someone before this jungle, Jake thought. This meant everything. To her he looked up. "I think I can fix it." Yara tilted her head. "Not perfect," Jake added, "but strong enough to swing again." She slowly offered the blade to him, this time with both hands. A gesture of respect, Jake sat cross-legged by the fire, using his small repair kit. Tiara watched silently, her injured legs stretched out, but her body alert. Jake worked carefully.
Ow.
The blade was traditional. No power source, no tech, but it had soul. He fused a carbon strip to reinforce the crack, then wrapped the hilt with a strip from his own survival belt. When he handed it back, her hands trembled just slightly. She inspected it, turned it. Then she stood, wobbling at first. But standing tall, Jake jumped to his feet. "Ow. Whoa, wait. You're still healing," but before he could stop her, she moved. Tiara raised the blade and stepped into a combat stance, slow, graceful, sharp. Her bare feet slid over the dirt, her body swaying with memory and rhythm. Even injured, she looked like a dancer of death. Jake couldn't take his eyes off her. She wasn't showing off. She was remembering who she used to be. Then suddenly her leg buckled. Jake lunged forward and caught her before she hit the ground. For a second there, faces were close. Tiara's eyes widened. She was breathing heavily, but not out of anger. Her expression had changed. Vulnerability, embarrassment, and something else. Trust. Jake helped her sit. "Told you it was too soon." She looked down, avoiding his eyes. Then, to Jake's surprise, she placed the repaired blade beside him, not in her own lap. She was offering him part of her strength. That night, Jake noticed her mood was different. She wasn't watching him like before. Not as a threat, not as prey, but as a partner. She sat closer to the fire than usual. She wasn't curled up with claws ready. Instead, she was sitting with her legs crossed, eyes blinking slowly, and then she laughed. A low, short sound, but unmistakable. Jake blinked. Was that Tiara? Covered her mouth, pretending she hadn't made a sound. "What was so funny?" he asked, smiling. She pointed at the patch he had put on her blade. It was uneven. Ugly, he laughed. It holds together. She mimicked him. Ugly, but strong. It was the first time she spoke his language. Jake's smile faded not from sadness, but from how deeply the moment struck him. The fierce alien girl wasn't just healing physically, she was opening up, and her broken blade. It wasn't broken anymore, just like her. The night was quiet, too quiet. Jake had just finished checking Tiara's bandages. She no longer hissed or flinched at his touch. Instead, she sat still, her eyes watching the flames. She looked calm. But Jake felt something in the air. A shift. Like the jungle had stopped breathing. Something's wrong, he muttered. Then it happened. Cracked a branch, snapped in the distance. Not an animal. Not a mistake. It was deliberate. Tiara's ears perked up, her body stiffened. She smelled it too, trouble. Move, she whispered suddenly, before Jake could ask. She pushed him flat to the ground. A plasma dart sliced through, the air missing his head by inches. It burned through the log behind him with a hiss. Jake rolled, drew his pistol, and fired into the darkness. But they were already surrounded. Figures stepped out from the tree stall, armored, cloaked in tribal. Mark's Tiara's people. Or what was left of them, Jake counted for. Maybe 5 warriors. All wore the same insignia that was tattooed across Tiara's ribs, rising moon with 3 fangs. But their faces weren't welcoming. They looked at Tiara like she was something dirty, a traitor. One warrior stepped forward, huge, scarred, wearing bones on his shoulder like trophies. His eyes locked onto her. He spoke in her native tongue, voice sharp and loud. Tiara's expression didn't change. But Jake noticed her hand grip the hilt of her repaired blade tightly. She responded, her voice like steel, calm, firm. Not afraid? Jake didn't understand the words, but the message was clear. They weren't here to bring her home. They were here to erase her. Suddenly, the large warrior lunged at Jake. Tiara moved faster. She stepped between them, blade drawn, blocking the strike with a loud clang. Sparks flew. Jake staggered back as she spun, knocked the attacker away, screamed something fierce and ancient, a war cry that sent chills down his spine. She's defending me, Jake realized. She chose a side, and it was his another. Warrior rushed forward. Jake fired. The shot grazed the attacker's leg, sending him crashing into the dirt. Tiara didn't hesitate. She grabbed Jake's arm. Run. They turned and darted into the jungle, dodging vines, roots, and falling leaves. Plasma bolts flew behind them, burning trees and lighting up the dark. Jake's legs burned. His chest heaved. But he didn't stop. Neither did she. Even wounded, Tiara moved like a shadow, fast, graceful, protective. She didn't leave him behind. She led him. They slid down a muddy hill, splashed through a stream, and ducked into a thick cave hidden by moss. Silence, darkness only. Their breathing echoed through the stone. Jake collapsed against the wall, gasping. They were trying to kill you. Why? Tiara didn't answer at first. Then, slowly, she looked at him and touched her own chest. Exile. She tapped his chest. Healer. Jake blinked. They hate me because I helped you. She nodded once, then whispered, weakness is forbidden. Her eyes dropped, ashamed. Jake felt his chest tighten. They think healing makes you weak. Tiara looked away. Jake stepped closer. It doesn't. You protected me. You saved me back there. That's not weakness. She didn't reply, but her hand found his without looking, and held it. Outside, the jungle burned in patches. The tribal warriors searched, howled, and shouted her name. But inside the cave, the so-called beast of the jungle leaned her head on a human's shoulder. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she wasn't being hunted alone. The jungle grew darker the deeper they ran. Strange glowing vines swung overhead like warning signs. The air was thick, wet, alive. But Jake and Tiara didn't stop behind them. The tribal warriors were still tracking shadows moving through the trees like ghosts. Then they heard it. Rushing water. Ahead, the ground dropped into a steep, rocky slope. At the bottom raged a wide, fast-moving river. The current was wild, smashing into jagged stones and swallowing whole branches like twigs. Jake stepped to the edge. No bridge. Tiara's breathing was heavy. Her injured leg was trembling, and blood soaked through her wrappings again. She stared at the river like it was a past nightmare come back to life. Jake glanced at her. "Is there another way?" She shook her head, then pointed at the far bank. "Safe there." Jake narrowed his eyes. "That water will tear us apart." Tiara didn't answer. Instead, she tied a strip of cloth around both their wrists. Jake looked at the knot in surprise. "What are you?" But she had already jumped. The cold hit like knives. The river pulled them under instantly. Jake gasped and kicked upward, dragging Tiara with him. The current spun them around, smashing his shoulder into a rock. He winced but held on. Tiara fought the water like a wild animal. She was fading. Her wounded leg couldn't kick. Her body started to sink. Jake grabbed the cloth binding their wrists and pulled. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar. "Just hold on." He wrapped his arm around her waist and kicked hard toward a fallen tree sticking out near the other bank. Another sharp turn. The current slammed them against a submerged log. Jake grabbed it, yelling, in pain as it scraped his skin, but he held on. With one arm, he pulled Tiara up beside him. They climbed, gasping and soaked, collapsing in the wet mud. She was coughing hard. Her eyes fluttered. Jake crawled over and tilted her head up. "Come on, breathe." And then she spat out water and gasped. Jake dropped beside her, heart pounding. They had made it an hour past. They had found a small cave hidden behind hanging moss. Jake started a fire while Tiara shivered, wrapped in his jacket. Her lips were blue, her skin cold. Jake knew hypothermia when he saw it. He moved closer, trying to warm her. She didn't push him away, but what happened next surprised even him. She leaned into his chest, and Newsy led, soft, like a frightened kitten looking. For comfort, Jake blinked, unsure how to react. "You okay?" Tiara didn't speak, but her hands gripped his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear. Then, slowly, she whispered, "You saved me." Jake smiled, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. "That's what we do." She looked up at him. "Why? That question again?" Jake exhaled. "Because you're worth saving." She blinked, stunned by the simple words. Later, while the fire crackled and rain fell outside the cave, Tiara reached into her pouch. She pulled out a small, shining stone. It glowed faintly in her hands, soft blue light pulsing with her heartbeat. Jake tilted his head. "What is that?" Tiara looked at the stone, then at him. "Life debt stone," she whispered. "Once given, cannot be taken back." Jake's eyes widened. "Wait, are you giving that to me?" Nodded, then gently placed the stone in his palm. Her fingers closed over his. "You are mine now," she said softly. "And I am yours." Jake stared at the stone, warm, glowing, alive. He looked back at her. The fierce warrior from the jungle, who once growled like a beast, was now curled against him, offering her trust, her loyalty, maybe something more, and she looked peaceful. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that tiny cave by the river, something had changed forever. The chase had ended, but their journey together, it had just begun. The jungle was quiet again. Too quiet, Jake stirred from sleep inside the river cave. The fire had burned low. He blinked, reaching instinctively toward his side, but something was missing. 2 single quotes. Why, she was gone. Jake shot up, heart pounding. Her blade was missing too. He stepped outside the cave, rain still dripping from the leaves. The morning fog swirled like ghosts between the trees. That's when he heard it, a scream. A cry not of pain, but of rage. Tiara's voice. Jake ran. He found her in a clearing, surrounded 3 of her former clan warriors, armed. Armored, ready to strike, Tiara stood in the middle, her wounded leg shaking, her repaired blade glowing faintly in the rising sun. Her eyes were wild again, but not the same way as before. This wasn't fury, this was pain and defiance. Jake started to step forward, but one of the warriors noticed him and threw a knife at his feet. A warning, stay out of this, human. One of them growled in broken English. She is our shame. Our law says she must fall. Jake didn't back off. She's not your shame. She's your only honor left. It's the biggest warrior the tribe's enforcer. By the look of his armor, growled and stepped toward Tiara, but before he could reach her, she moved. Like lightning, the clash was brutal. Steel and bone. Tiara didn't fight like she had in the cave. She didn't hold back. Every strike was sharp, fast, and loud. She ducked. She spun. Her movements were not the wild swings of a beast, but the graceful precision of a master warrior. Jake watched in awe. The girl who had once growled at him over a fire was now fighting 3 trained killers, and winning. But it wasn't easy. She screamed as her leg gave out for a second. One warrior slashed across her arm. Another kicked her down. Jake raised his gun, but Tiara screamed back at him. No. Mine. She didn't want help. This was her fight. She rose again, bloody and shaking, and with a roar that echoed across the jungle. She brought her blade down and shattered the enforcer's weapon in 2. The others froze. Jake held his breath. Then, Tiara stepped forward, grabbed the enforcer by his collar, and let him go. No kill. She spared him. Jake couldn't believe it. Why? He whispered. She turned to him, chest heaving, eyes burning. Because I am no longer a beast, she said. I am more. The warriors fled, broken, beaten, not by her strength, but by her mercy. Jake walked to her slowly. Tiara collapsed into his arms. He caught her, held her. She didn't resist. He wiped the blood from her face. You didn't have to do that alone. She looked up at him, voice low. Yes, I did, but now I don't have to anymore. Smiled. Then, without thinking, he leaned his forehead against hers. She closed her eyes, and for a long, silent moment, in the middle of the broken battlefield, they simply breathed. That day, the jungle witnessed something new. Not a beast, not a monster, but a warrior transformed by kindness. And standing beside a human who believed in her when no one else did, the legend of the Beast of Varnock had ended, in the story of Tiara. The warrior who chose mercy had just begun. Days later, the jungle was no longer a prison. It was quiet now, peaceful. Birds chirped above. Sunlight broke through the canopy like gold pouring from the sky. Tiara stood beside Jake on a ridge that overlooked the valley. Her arm was still bandaged, and her limp was still there, but she stood tall, stronger. She watched the distant horizon as a rescue ship descended, landing thrusters kicking up leaves and dirt. Jake adjusted the signal beacon strapped to his shoulder. His team had finally tracked his location after weeks of silence. Help had come, but now, leaving didn't feel like victory. Tiara hadn't spoken much since the battle. She had become quiet, not distant, just thoughtful. Jake handed her the small communicator he had fixed days ago. You can go back with me. The Alliance will take you in, give you protection. Tiara stared at the device, then at him. Do not need protection, she said softly. I need purpose. Jake tilted his head. What do you mean? She turned to face him and held out something glowing in her hand. It's a bindstone, the same one she had offered before, only this time it pulsed, brighter like it had made up its mind. Jake frowned. She stepped closer, her voice steady. This stone joins lives. If accepted, it means we walk the same path, warrior and healer. Bonded. Jake's heart thumped. Tiara, are you sure? She nodded once. You didn't just heal my body, she whispered. You healed something no blade could reach. She placed the stone into his palm. I was trained to be fierce, feared, but with you, I learned to be gentle. I am not. Ashamed. Jake stared at the stone, then at her. He took her hand gently, and I was taught to fear what's different. But you proved that what's different can be beautiful. They stood like that for a moment, two souls from different worlds, one choice. The rescue team arrived soon after. They surrounded Jake, asking questions, checking his vitals. But he kept glancing back, making sure. She was still there. She was watching him from the jungle edge, just before the team boarded the shuttle. Jake pulled away from the group. He jogged back to her. Tiara looked at him, expression unreadable. Jake raised the bindstone, still glowing. "You coming with me?" he asked, smiling. She stepped forward, and for the first time in her life, she smiled back. Sometime later, they walked side by side through the metal halls of the space station. Tiara wore simple clothing, her blade resting on her back like a reminder of who she once was. But she wasn't alone anymore, and every crew member, who Posk, gave her a second look, not out of fear, but respect. The fierce jungle warrior who once roamed the trees like a ghost had now become something rare, a legend with a heart, and the human who healed her. He didn't just fix a wound, he changed a destiny. Final shot as the stars stretched. Across the view screen, Jake and Tiara stood at the front of the ship, watching the galaxy unfold, and hand in hand, they stepped into whatever came next.